A nurse handed him a mop, thinking he was the janitor. A few minutes later, she was begging him to save her daughter's life. What happened next left the entire hospital in stunned silence. Dr. Marcus Hill had always believed that the path to greatness was lined with humility. With years of rigorous training, sleepless nights in medical school, and countless hours in the operating room, he had earned his place as one of the most promising young neurosurgeons in the country. On the morning of his first day at Westbridge Medical Center, a prestigious hospital in a wealthy suburb, he dressed sharply but modestly. A navy blue button-up shirt, khaki slacks, clean shoes, and a leather briefcase. He carried no arrogance, just confidence in his skills and a heart committed to healing. As he stepped through the main entrance, he noticed the grand lobby buzzing with professionals in lab coats, scrubs, and administrative uniforms. People moved with purpose. The hospital was immaculate, modern, and proud of its reputation. Marcus had studied here briefly during a fellowship, but had never worked full-time on staff. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter, one he had earned with nothing but determination and sacrifice. He was walking toward the reception desk to check in when he felt a tap on his shoulder. A white nurse, maybe in her early 30s, with a stern look on her face, pointed toward a spilled coffee cup near the corner of the hallway. "You should clean that up before someone slips," she said, not even bothering to ask who he was. In her mind, it was obvious. Dark skin, no lab coat, not standing behind a desk, he had to be part of the janitorial crew. Marcus blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. He looked down at the floor, then back up at her. She wasn't smiling. In fact, her expression was mildly annoyed, like she was irritated the spill hadn't already been taken care of. He glanced at a janitor's cart nearby. She pointed toward it and repeated herself, this time louder, assuming he hadn't understood her the first time. "Grab that and clean it, please." Around them, a few people had noticed. A couple of interns passing by gave each other awkward looks. One older nurse smirked and kept walking. No one stepped in. No one questioned the assumption. No one wondered why a janitor would be carrying a leather briefcase instead of cleaning supplies. Because for some, appearances told them everything they needed to know. For a brief moment, the air grew tense, though only Marcus seemed to feel the weight of it. He could have corrected her. He could have snapped, listed his qualifications, or reminded her that black men belong in more places than just maintenance roles. But instead, he just nodded gently, walked over to the cart, and paused. Then, just as calmly, he set his briefcase on the ground, took a napkin from the cart, not even touching the mop, and dabbed at the spill lightly. Then he picked up his briefcase and walked away, disappearing into the elevator without a single word. The nurse stood there, confused. Was he upset? Was he really part of cleaning staff? Why didn't he say anything? Her mind moved quickly but didn't land on any answers. Meanwhile, the few who had witnessed the moment returned to their routines, some feeling vaguely uncomfortable but saying nothing. In a hospital where image and status mattered, no one wanted to admit they might have just watched a racial microaggression unfold right before their eyes. Upstairs, Marcus checked in at the surgical department. The head of neurosurgery, Dr. Patel, greeted him with warmth and excitement. "We're lucky to have you, Marcus. You're going to change lives here," he said. No one up there mistook him for anything other than what he was, a brilliant mind and a skilled surgeon. Still, the incident lingered in Marcus's thoughts. Not because he hadn't experienced similar things before, but because no matter how far he rose, no matter how many degrees he held or how many lives he saved, the world still often saw his skin before his skill. It was the quiet kind of racism, the kind that hides behind assumptions, behind politeness, behind innocent mistakes. The kind that stings more because it's so subtle, so socially accepted, that most people won't even call it out. But Marcus had long ago decided he wouldn't let those moments define him. He had been underestimated his entire life. Teachers, classmates, even some of his own professors had doubted his abilities until he proved them wrong. And today would be no different. He knew the truth would reveal itself soon enough, not through confrontation, but through excellence. Through the work he had dedicated his life to mastering. As the day began and surgeries were assigned, the hospital staff remained unaware of what was coming. The man they had just misjudged was about to change their perception forever, not with anger, not with lectures, but with compassion and brilliance that couldn't be ignored. And when the moment arrived, It would shake their assumptions to the core. The surgical wing of Westbridge Medical Center moved like a well-oiled machine. Every patient was tracked, every case reviewed, and every procedure scheduled with military precision. As the morning unfolded, the team gathered for a high-risk operation involving a patient with a cerebral aneurysm. The staff had been briefed the day before that a new neurosurgeon would be joining them, but few had paid attention to the email announcement. Names were skimmed over, and faces weren't yet known. In the operating prep room, a small group of residents waited for the lead surgeon to arrive. Most assumed it would be one of the senior staff they were familiar with, someone they had worked under before. When the door opened and Dr. Marcus Hill walked in wearing scrubs, surgical cap in hand, the room fell unusually silent. A few nurses exchanged puzzled glances. One of the anesthesiologists, who had witnessed the mop incident earlier, looked up with visible surprise. No one said anything at first. The atmosphere shifted subtly. Some people tried to mask their confusion with professionalism, others simply stared, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they had assumed just an hour earlier. Marcus's face remained calm, focused, entirely unbothered by the tension in the room. He walked over to the monitor, pulled up the scans, and began speaking confidently about the strategy for the procedure. His voice was steady. His analysis was precise. Within minutes, it was clear to everyone present. This man knew exactly what he was doing. Even those who had doubted him moments ago now found themselves nodding in agreement as he broke down the surgical approach. He spoke with the kind of clarity that only comes from years of dedicated practice. The questions he posed to the residents were insightful, his leadership natural. By the time the patient was wheeled in, the awkwardness had melted away, replaced by a growing sense of respect. But not everyone could move on that quickly. Standing just outside the glass partition was the nurse from earlier. She had arrived to observe the procedure, not realizing who would be leading it. As she looked into the room and saw Marcus preparing for surgery, her face froze. A chill passed over her. It took her a moment to understand what she was seeing. The man she had asked to clean a spill, the man she hadn't even bothered to address by name, was the lead neurosurgeon. Humiliation crept in slowly, like water leaking through a crack. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and for a moment, she considered walking away. But she stayed, rooted by a mixture of disbelief and regret. Every movement Marcus made inside that room seemed to underline her mistake. She watched him speak with authority, command the respect of the team, and take charge of a life-or-death situation with effortless calm. There was no trace of arrogance in his demeanor, no hint of resentment. Just quiet, unshakable professionalism. The surgery itself was complex. The patient's aneurysm was dangerously close to rupturing, and any misstep could lead to permanent damage or death. But Marcus moved with surgical elegance. Every incision, every adjustment, every tool handed to him was met with absolute control. The staff assisting him followed his lead without question. For over 3 hours, the operation progressed under his direction, and not once did his focus waver. When the final sutures were in place and the patient was stabilized, a wave of relief swept through the operating room. The procedure had been a success. For many in the room, it was just another case, another life saved by a capable surgeon. But for those who had misjudged Marcus earlier that day, it was something far more personal. A mirror had been held up to their assumptions, and they didn't like what they saw. After the operation, murmurs spread through the halls. People began whispering about the new neurosurgeon, the one who had been mistaken for a janitor just hours before. Some tried to dismiss it as a misunderstanding. Others found themselves questioning why they hadn't seen him for who he was from the beginning. The truth, however uncomfortable, was now undeniable. They had judged a man not by his credentials, not by his words or deeds, but by the color of his skin and the casual stereotypes they carried. Marcus returned to his office briefly to document the case. His expression remained composed, as if the day's events hadn't affected him. But within the hospital walls, the ripple effects were just beginning. Conversations that had long been avoided were now impossible to ignore. Staff who prided themselves on being inclusive and professional had been forced to confront their unconscious bias in the most public and undeniable way. What made the moment even more profound was how Marcus had handled it, not with confrontation or resentment, but with grace and quiet excellence. He had let his work speak louder than any accusation. And in doing so, he had shaken the very foundation of how some people at Westbridge viewed race, status, and capability. There was a sense that something had shifted, not just in perception, but in the unspoken rules of how people treated one another. And while many still tried to move past it quickly, a few couldn't help but wonder, what if he hadn't been so composed? What if he had walked away that morning, choosing not to work in a place that couldn't see him clearly? But Marcus had stayed. And in doing so, he had forced the hospital to see not just who he was, but who they were. The hospital's routine resumed in the hours following the successful surgery, but the undercurrent of unease remained for some. Word had traveled quickly among departments about the morning's quiet humiliation and its powerful reversal. For most, it was gossip laced with discomfort. For a few, especially those who had witnessed the event firsthand, it was a moment they couldn't unsee. And for one woman in particular, the nurse who had handed Dr. Hill the mop, it was a burden that grew heavier with each passing hour. She had avoided eye contact all day, silently reeling from the shame that had settled in her chest. The memory of her mistake kept replaying. She thought of how casually she had assumed his role, how confidently she had directed him without hesitation. And now, she couldn't escape the knowledge that the man she'd misjudged had just saved someone's life in the operating room. But fate, sometimes cruel and sometimes strangely poetic, wasn't finished making its point. Late in the afternoon, a code was called in the emergency room. A child had been in a serious car accident and was being rushed in with critical injuries. EMTs reported head trauma, loss of consciousness, and signs of internal bleeding. The ER staff snapped into motion, preparing the trauma bay. Triage was activated, specialists alerted. The child's mother arrived moments later in a frenzy of fear, confusion, and grief. Her daughter had been a passenger in a vehicle struck by a reckless driver who had run a red light. It wasn't until she arrived at the hospital that she realized the full extent of the damage. Her little girl was fighting for her life, and time was running out. Then came the realization that shattered her already fragile composure. The child would need emergency brain surgery to survive. The impact had caused internal swelling, and without rapid intervention, her condition would deteriorate beyond recovery. The mother collapsed in tears, begging the staff to do something, anything, to save her baby. When the name of the neurosurgeon on call was read aloud, a few heads turned. There was a pause, one filled with awkwardness and a strange kind of irony. The nurse at the center of the morning's incident heard the name and went still. Marcus Hill. Her breath caught in her throat. The child in critical condition was her daughter. The moment was almost too much to process. The same man she had dismissed and demeaned without a second thought was now the only person who could possibly save her child's life. She was no longer the nurse issuing orders or managing the floor. She was now a mother, desperate, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of someone she had wronged. She waited in anguish as her daughter was prepped for surgery. Guilt and fear mixed into a heavy storm in her chest. There was no hiding from the truth anymore. She hadn't just made a mistake earlier that day. She had made a judgment about a human being, about his worth, based on an assumption born of bias. And now that man held her daughter's life in his hands. But Marcus didn't hesitate. When he was briefed on the case, he took immediate action. The details of the morning didn't matter now. He had sworn an oath, and that meant something to him. The operating room was prepared once again, and the team mobilized under his direction. Every second mattered. The pressure was immense, but he remained composed and focused. For the nurse, the weight was unbearable. As the hours stretched on, regret consumed her. She thought about the years she had worked in the hospital, about the pride she had once taken in being a professional. She wondered how many other times she had misjudged someone without realizing it. She thought about the lesson her daughter might learn, not only from the surgery, but from everything that had led up to it. She prayed, not just for her daughter's life, but for the chance to make things right. And though she couldn't see what was happening behind the closed doors of the operating room, those inside watched as Marcus once again worked with a calm precision that inspired confidence. He treated the child not as a symbolic gesture, not as an opportunity to make a statement, but simply as a patient in need of help. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need apologies. His purpose was larger than that. And in that moment, his integrity spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. By the time the surgery was completed and the child stabilized, another life had been saved, though in many ways, more than one life had been changed. The nurse, shaken and overwhelmed, would never forget what had transpired. The judgment she had passed so easily had returned to her in a moment of unimaginable vulnerability. And the man she had underestimated had shown her the true meaning of grace. There was a new silence in the hospital now, one not born of discomfort, but of reflection. People were thinking, watching, reconsidering. And for the first time, many were beginning to understand the weight of a single assumption and the power of rising above it. The days that followed were quiet, but the emotional aftershocks of what had happened lingered in the halls of Westbridge Medical Center. People moved through their routines, but something had changed beneath the surface. Whispers of the story, how a black neurosurgeon had been mistaken for janitorial staff, how he had responded not with bitterness but with excellence, and how he had then saved the life of the very woman's daughter who had misjudged him, spread quickly. Some dismissed it as just an unfortunate misunderstanding. Others understood that it was a mirror reflecting far deeper problems than anyone wanted to admit. The hospital, like many institutions, prided itself on being progressive. Diversity posters hung on the walls. Training modules were required annually. But this event had revealed the stark difference between policy and perception, between inclusion in paperwork and inclusion in people's minds. The truth was that even in a space filled with educated professionals, unconscious bias still thrived. It wasn't always loud or aggressive. It was often quiet, casual, and embedded in the assumptions that shaped everyday interactions. The nurse who had made the mistake never offered a public apology, but those around her noticed a shift. Her posture softened. Her tone changed. She began listening more, asking more questions, hesitating before passing judgment. Her relationship with Dr. Hill remained professional, but there was a gravity in her presence now whenever he entered a room. Respect, once withheld, had been earned, but more importantly, it had been awakened. Dr. Marcus Hill continued his work with the same focus and dedication he always had. He never brought up the incident. He didn't need to. The lesson had spoken for itself. He became something of a quiet legend among the staff, not because he had demanded attention, but because he had redefined what strength looked like. For many young black professionals in the hospital, his story became a source of hope and pride. They saw in him a reflection of their own daily struggles to be seen, respected, and valued on the basis of merit, not assumptions. Hospital leadership eventually caught wind of the events in fuller detail. A private meeting was held, and though no names were mentioned, the message was clear. The institution had to do more than pay lip service to equity. In response, the hospital initiated a new peer-led program centered around lived experiences, not just compliance checkboxes. Staff were invited to share stories, confront biases, and engage in conversations that were long overdue. It wasn't perfect, and not everyone participated enthusiastically, but it was a start, a genuine attempt to evolve rather than perform. Meanwhile, patients continued coming through the hospital's doors, unaware of the silent shift that had occurred behind the scenes. To them, Dr. Hill was simply a brilliant surgeon, one who carried himself with humility and care. And perhaps that's what made his impact even more profound. He didn't seek to teach through lectures or correction. He taught through action, by showing up, doing the work, and rising above the noise. The little girl whose life he had saved remained in recovery for several weeks. Her prognosis was excellent, thanks to the quick and skillful operation. Her mother visited daily, never missing a moment, often pausing in the hallway when she saw Dr. Hill pass by. Their exchanges were brief but weighted. Gratitude sat in her eyes. Regret lived in her silence. And though they never openly discussed the morning that had preceded the surgery, they both knew that something irreversible had taken place, not just in their own lives, but in the culture surrounding them. What began as a moment of quiet prejudice had unfolded into a story of unexpected redemption. Not the kind of redemption that absolves wrongdoing, but the kind that prompts growth. The kind that demands introspection and leaves no room for denial. It was proof that even in a place dedicated to healing, some wounds weren't physical, and some recoveries began only after dignity was restored. Outside the hospital walls, the world remained complex, divided in many ways. Racism was still real. Bias was still present. But inside Westbridge, there now existed a living memory of what could happen when integrity met ignorance and triumphed. Dr. Hill's presence had become a quiet force, reminding everyone that professionalism and humanity weren't separate traits, but deeply connected. That character mattered more than pride. That excellence was undeniable, even when prejudice tried to overshadow it. In the end, no press release was issued. No viral video circulated. There were no awards or public acknowledgments. But for those who were there, for those who watched an act of subtle discrimination transform into a powerful demonstration of grace, it was unforgettable. They had witnessed something rare, a moment where character prevailed over judgment, and where the strength to remain calm became the sharpest kind of justice. It was a lesson that would outlast the moment. A reminder that in a world still learning how to truly see each other, the clearest vision sometimes comes from those who refuse to look away. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next powerful story. Until next time, stay kind, stay thoughtful, and keep standing up for what's right.